On May 7, 2020, a man named Gordon D. claims that he was awoken late in the evening by a bizarre sound. The origin of that sound remains a mystery to this day. It was quite warm that May evening. Gordon, laying in his bed at his home in Norfolk, in a village called Stalham, recalls waking to a bizarre sound that he described as, quote, real deep vibration. He felt as though it was something large moving over his home, low and slow moving. As it passed over, he found he could not move, and at one point felt as though he might still be asleep and dreaming, and he chalked the whole odd event up to that until the next morning when his wife, over breakfast, asked about the events of that evening. She wanted to know exactly what he'd seen, as she indicated that she had observed him actually pull back the curtains from his bedside. His bed was next to the window. He looked out and then uttered the words, "Oh no." Her inquiries seemed to jog something loose in Gordon's memory, and he vaguely recalled the events of that evening, though just barely. As he thought about it, he remembered that he had moved the curtain back from his bedside, but does not recall saying anything. He just knows that in that moment, he felt an intense fear, something that he found strange as he isn't one to scare easily. In any other circumstance, he would have jumped out of bed and gone out to investigate, but this time he felt frozen with fear. "I've never heard anything like it," Gordon said of the noise, which he noted was heavy and slow, a vibration that felt, quote, in the air, low and overhead. It was definitely over the house. We went to bed around 10:30 p.m., must have been asleep for 11 p.m. It was not a helicopter. It would have crashed down as the propellers would be far too slow, and sounds nothing like it. Planes? Not a chance. It was like an electric charge, but the sound, I've not stopped thinking about it all day. The very next day, Gordon spoke to his next-door neighbor's daughter, a 50-year-old woman, who lived a few miles away in a village called Potter Hyman. She too claimed to have heard the strange noise. In fact, it woke up everyone in her house. She claimed that they heard it around 3 a.m. When they went out to look, they found nothing outside. Later that day, Gordon's wife complained of a headache. It is not clear if these two things are related or just a weird coincidence. Gordon himself could not get the sound of that vibration out of his head for the entire day, and is still bothered by the fact that he did not jump out of bed to investigate. What would cause him to freeze with fear? What would cause him to, according to his wife, utter those words, "Oh no," and at the same time have no memory of doing it? What exactly happened that May evening in Stalham remains a mystery. I do find it interesting that Gordon was heard to say, "Oh no," as opposed to "Oh wow" or "What is that?" Those words, "Oh no," seem to indicate a prior experience or experiences with whatever it was that he saw when he pulled back those curtains, like he knew what was coming. If you take into account Gordon's loss of memory, the words he said, the sensation of feeling paralyzed with fear, the oddness of the sound, and his wife's subsequent headache, it does make me wonder if something else happened that night that neither Gordon or his wife could recall. We've all heard accounts of UFOs being intercepted by military planes and helicopters, though very few of these skirmishes involve them engaging in battle. In July 1978, two pastors driving outside Glasgow, Kentucky, may have had a front row seat to one of these rare aerial dogfights. It was 9:30 p.m., July 13, 1978. Reverend Elizabeth and Reverend Stevenson were driving home from Louisville on Interstate 165 on a dark and foggy night. The two were about 25 miles south of Louisville when they thought they saw an airplane on fire, about 4 to 5 miles to the west. Concerned, they pulled off the road to watch, Given that they were both men of the cloth, I have to presume that they also prayed. Suddenly, they said, the object was about 100 yards away, hovering 30 feet above the ground and lighting up the entire sky. They both agreed that it was about 15 to 20 feet high and 30 to 40 feet long. It appeared yellow in the distance, but upon approach it became a dazzling bright white. After the couple and the occupants of another car watched for a few minutes, the object sped away rapidly to the west. They eventually returned to their vehicle and carried on towards home. About 7 miles outside of Glasgow, they observed what they thought was a sunrise, though they found that odd, and again they stopped their car. The same brightly lit object that they had seen earlier was back again. It was lighting up the entire sky, so bright that it had caused the passengers to think that there was a sunrise. For about 15 minutes they watched as it played around a hillside, going up and down and zigzagging. Things would take an even stranger turn when an airplane arrived on the scene. It appeared to circle the object at least once, at which point the UFO began to shoot, quote, ribbon-like flares at the plane. The two pastors were quite stunned and believed momentarily that they were watching an aerial dogfight. Strangely, they lost sight of the plane. They didn't see it leave or fly away, it just wasn't there anymore, and they never saw it again. The object's light gradually dimmed and then faded away altogether. It was enough to scare a person half to death, Reverend Elizabeth noted. It is unclear what exactly Reverend Elizabeth and Reverend Stevenson saw that evening. Did they see a UFO? And did that UFO shoot something at a plane? And what happened to that plane? These are all questions that need to be answered. In New South Wales, a group of motorists watched as something very strange played out in front of them. It was March 22nd, 1976, around 5:45 a.m. A couple sitting in a parked car, getting ready for work, and a utility driver passing by, watched as a large, bright light descended from the sky over a roadway in Nemingha. The light seemed to come down over a small car which was driving down the road. The light continued to descend until it completely enveloped the vehicle. The couple and the utility driver could not believe what they were seeing. They noted the small car's lights went out as the light enveloped it. When the light eventually dissipated a few seconds later, the small car had come to a stop on the wrong side of the road. A woman soon emerged from the vehicle and, using a cloth, wiped down her windshield, which was strangely covered in a white material. Her entire car appeared to be covered in this substance, whatever it was. The witness noted that the car did not have this substance on it prior to the appearance of the light. As the woman tossed the filthy cloth onto the road, the witnesses claimed that it seemed to ignite itself, burning away to nothing. As this was happening, the small car's headlights came back on again, seemingly by themselves. The female driver re-entered her vehicle and drove off down the road, very slowly. At about the same time, a woman living nearby saw a greenish-yellowish ball of light pass by at a low level and disappear behind a hill, in the vicinity of the Roadway incident. This account appears in the UFO Research Australia newsletter, January-February 1980 edition. The Mojave Desert in the southwestern United States is known for a lot of things, but Bigfoot isn't one of them, though over the years there have been a handful of reports involving encounters with these creatures by travelers passing through that arid landscape. The most notable encounter, in my opinion, occurred on June 22, 1978, the night that a snake hunter claims he was attacked by a Bigfoot. Douglas Bruce Groves, 23, of Ridgecrest, California, and his teenage brother and sister were out driving around the desert, searching an isolated area near Old Highway 395. They were looking for rattlesnakes for which to sell. It was around 2 a.m. when something grabbed Douglas's attention. To him, it looked like a pair of glowing eyes peering at him over a creosote bush just off the road. Unsure of what it was, he decided to investigate. He stopped his Jeep on the roadway about 30 feet from the bush. He stepped out and began walking in the direction of that bush. He began to hear a loud roar that got progressively louder the closer he got to the bush. Just then, to his shock, he felt something behind him grab him on each shoulder. Terrified, he attempted to run, but it was too late. The hands on his shoulders suddenly shifted down to his waist. They squeezed and lifted him from the waist and tossed him 10 feet through the air. He landed on the desert floor with a thud. Douglas immediately sprang to his feet and bolted for his Jeep. Even though he had been slightly injured in the fall, he felt it was necessary that he get out of there as soon as possible. His 2 siblings were frantic as he piled into the Jeep and drove away. He used his CB radio to call for help. He later spoke to the police about the incident. The brother and sister confirmed to the investigating deputies that they saw a large dark object pick up their brother and throw him. Police officers dispatched to the area that evening found nothing. A daylight search of the area also failed to discover anything other than strange impressions on the ground. At no point does Douglas say that the thing that threw him was a Bigfoot, though that does seem to be the main culprit. His brother and sister describe seeing a large dark object pick him up and toss him. Even a large man would most likely not be able to toss another man of even a smaller stature 10 feet. It would take a tremendous amount of force to achieve such a thing. If it was indeed a Bigfoot, then what would necessitate such aggressive behavior? For me, I have to wonder if the eyes that Douglas saw peeking over the creosote bush, eyes that he felt strange enough to exit his vehicle to investigate, actually belonged to another creature, and not necessarily the one that attacked him. He claimed that as he drew closer to the bush, he began to hear a loud growling noise. That noise increased the closer he got, at which point he was attacked from behind. I get the sense that the creature that attacked him was attempting to protect whatever it was that was behind that bush. Possibly a mischievous child peeking at a pair of headlights gliding along that lonely stretch of desert highway in the wee hours of the morning. The growl struck me as a warning. Don't get any closer. But as Douglas persisted, the creature had no choice but to intervene and throw Douglas away from where, possibly, its child was hiding. In that context, this Bigfoot attack, if that's what it was, seems in keeping with a mother or father protecting their young, and not nearly as sinister as it sounds on the surface. Using Wikipedia as a reference, a doppelganger is a biologically unrelated lookalike or a double of a living person. In fiction and mythology, a doppelganger is often portrayed as ghostly or paranormal phenomena, and usually seen as a harbinger of bad luck. Of course, as we all know, mythology often bleeds over into the real world, and people have described encounters with mysterious doppelgangers. More often they are just merely strange, sometimes frightening and sometimes quite pleasant. To Gordon Barrows, his encounter with a doppelganger might just have saved his life. Gordon Barrows, who would later go on to become the managing editor of World Petroleum, a trade journal, claims that in 1946, after being discharged from the United States Army, returned home to see his parents in Wyoming, and then went to college at the University of Wyoming at Laramie. While at school that winter, Barrows decided he would like to use his Jeep that he had purchased earlier at a sale of surplus Army equipment. During spring break, Barrows went home to pick up the Jeep and then set off for Laramie. It was bitterly cold, and Barrows chose to dress appropriately in a parka, gloves, and thick boots. He had driven through the day and into the night when he came upon some bad weather. A blizzard overtook the area, causing power outages and forcing cars off the road. Barrows was desperate to get to Laramie and decided to keep driving, albeit cautiously. At this point it was a near whiteout. He recalled that he had just topped a hill and started down into the canyon when he spotted, just barely, a man walking along the side of the road. Barrows feared the man would freeze to death out there and decided to slow up. He leaned out and called for the man, asking if he wanted to ride. When the figure walked within range of the Jeep's headlights, Barrows jolted in his seat. The man looked just like him, and was even wearing a light tank corps jacket, exactly like the one he had worn during the war. Somehow this odd coincidence seemed the most natural thing in the world, Barrows recalled. As the figure approached the Jeep, he said to Barrows, "You look sleepy. Want me to drive?" In fact, Barrows was exhausted. He had been driving for 18 hours already, and the blizzard conditions were beginning to take a toll on him. He needed sleep desperately and saw this as a possible opportunity to get some, however brief it might be. Barrows agreed and shifted over in his seat, allowing the stranger to get behind the wheel and drive. Within minutes, Barrows leaned back into his seat, closed his eyes, and drifted off to sleep. The next thing he remembers was waking up in silence. The engine was not running, and the stranger was sitting motionless in the driver's seat. They were at the end of the canyon, and Laramie was only 40 miles away, a straight shot through mostly flat road. At this point, the stranger got out of the Jeep. Despite Barrows' offer to take him into Laramie and buy him a coffee, the stranger refused. When Barrows thanked him, he replied simply, "You're welcome," and started walking back into the canyon. Barrows recalled that at the time the events all seemed totally normal and natural. Quote, "Like in a dream in which preposterous things seem ordinary." But this was not a dream, and Barrows knew that if any human had been out walking in that freezing snow-swept canyon, he would not have survived more than an hour or two. It was just not possible, especially given how he was dressed. The fact that he proceeded to walk back into the canyon is another bizarre point. Upon examination, nothing about his experience made sense. Even his own reaction in the moment seemed baffling in hindsight. In the years since, Barrows come to believe that somehow, in some way, a version of himself had shown up on that road that night and saved his life.